And our next guest is a graduate of Harvard and NYU, a successful businessman, and one of President Trump's most influential advisors. Please welcome Jared Kushner with Time White House correspondent Brian Bennett.
Hello, I'm Brian Bennett, Senior White House Correspondent for Time Magazine, and I'm very happy to be here with Jared Kushner, Senior Advisor to President Trump, and a very influential member of the White House staff. It's amazing how many very important topics you're touching right now. Middle East peace, the Middle East peace process, sentencing reform and criminal justice reform, and you're also taking on an expanded role in immigration policy. We will get to some of those important policy discussions later on in this, but I want to start off just asking you some important questions from the news, particularly the Mueller Report.
Thank you. Hello, Brian, I assume at the end we'll have a chance for redactions?
We will. You can, please, I hope you do not redact anything.
Thank you.
One of the first things I wanted to do is just you make a lot of appearances in the Mueller Report in the 400 pages. And just to kind of recap a few of those, one, you were at the storied Trump Tower meeting in June 2016 with a Russian lawyer, and you took a meeting with a Russian banker in December 2016 after the election. You also had meetings with the Russian ambassador Kislyak during the transition. Had discussions with him about establishing a channel with Moscow. And also you received a U.S.-Russia reconciliation plan from a friend of yours, Rick Gerson, that you then passed on to Tillerson and to Secretary of State Tillerson and Steve Bannon. The main question here is, through all of this, were you concerned about the image that you were setting? That Russia was clearly trying to run people at the Trump campaign? And do you think that, in retrospect, you were a little naive to take some of those meetings, especially during the transition?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me here today, and thank you for opening with the soft stuff. So that's good. But when the whole
I'm a reporter. It's my job.
That's okay. No, it's good. It's when the whole notion of the Russia collusion narrative came up, I was the first person to say, happy to participate with any investigations. I thought the whole thing was kind of nonsense, to be honest with you. I mean, we ran a very untraditional campaign, and we had a lot of outsiders coming in. And in the beginning, we couldn't even get a lot of the people from Washington to work with the campaign. So normally in politics, you have people who are known by all the different entities, and we were just very unknown to everybody. Our focus during the campaign was on the candidate, the message, and we built a very entrepreneurial campaign. And we made a lot of very good decisions along the way, which is what enabled us to be successful. I think at this point I've done 3 House interviews. I did about 9 hours with a special counsel, and if you look at my statement from July, I put out about a 12-page statement about explaining all these different things. I think that everything I said is now proven to be true, and it's been very, very thoroughly investigated. And just going back to this stuff too, I mean, you take a lot of these things in retrospect and you look at it. Lindsey Graham told me I've had the best text message in the history of text messages when I was in that crazy meeting in Trump Tower, and I said, get me the hell out of here, basically. But again, it's a meeting that had it never come up and had it never been done, I wouldn't have thought about it again. But now the media spends so much time focusing on it. And quite frankly, the whole thing's just a big distraction for the country. And you look at what Russia did, buying some Facebook ads to try to sow dissent and do it. And it's a terrible thing. But I think the investigations and all of the speculation that's happened for the last 2 years has had a much harsher impact on our democracy than a couple of Facebook ads. I mean, I think they said they spent about $160,000. I spent $160,000 on Facebook every 3 hours during the campaign. So, if you look at the magnitude of what they did and what they accomplished, I think the ensuing investigations have been way more harmful to our country.
I mean, it was a lot more than just a few Facebook ads, and also there were Russian operatives organizing real events during the campaign. So it had real-world impact on their social media campaign. And then not only that, but Russia was actively hacking and stealing documents that they then systematically released at certain key points during the campaign. one of the biggest things I think that doesn't sit well with the public is why didn't the Trump campaign, openly say, Russia, we don't need your help, we don't want your help, please stop?
First of all, in the campaign, we didn't know that Russia was doing what they were doing.
By October 6th, the U.S. intelligence services did make the assessment public that Russia was involved in a social media campaign to influence the election.
Yeah, so again, if you looked at my perspective where I was, we were trying to decide which states do we play in, where's the candidate going, where are we allocating our resources, where are we buying more television, where are we buying more digital advertising, where are we doing more door knocking to get out the votes. We were doing a ton of data that we built ourselves, and all the different movements were really correlated with our data. So we knew who all the persuadable voters were. We had about a universe of about 26 million people in 17 states. And every dollar we were spending was about how do we get to them as efficiently as possible. So again, the notion of what they were doing didn't even register to us as being impactful. And again, if you ask me if you look at our data operation, which has now gone down to be very revered by Facebook and a lot of people, all built from scratch, not built with traditional political people, we knew exactly why the data was moving, where it was moving, what messaging we were sending, and we know why we won. And at the end of the day, again, we had a great candidate, and the candidate had a message that resonated with America. He campaigned his butt off. I mean, we had the last day, we did 6 stops, 7 stops, doing all these rallies. He had crowds like you couldn't imagine. People were coming out that never voted before, and all of our data models proved right. So again, you can look at it Monday morning quarterback and said maybe you should have looked at those times, but I personally think that what happened is all these people thought Trump was going to lose. They all predicted Trump was going to lose. They were wrong. The American electorate in this great democratic system chose the opposite. And then I think that instead of saying, oh wait, we got it wrong, they said, well, maybe it was Russia. And I think now we've spent 2 years going through that nonsense. And the one thing the Mueller report was very conclusive on is there was absolutely no coordination or collusion with the Trump campaign. And everything that the president's been saying, everything that I've been saying for 2 years has now been fully authenticated.
Are you concerned that Russian intelligence services were trying to find ways to influence you and other people close to Trump? And for example, we can go into the meeting with Sergei Gorkov from VEB, this Russian state-owned bank that you had in December 2016, where he brought a bag of dirt from your parents, I guess your grandparents' home village in Belarus, and presented it to you. At the time, did that feel uncomfortable? Did that feel like this guy was trying to maybe offer you some business incentives to influence the Trump campaign and the Trump administration policy?
Yeah, so again, we never discussed business together. I've, again, done testimony on this. Everything was unusual at that time. I mean, we were, like I said, an outsider campaign. The advice I got during the campaign, actually, from Henry Kissinger was that everyone around the world is very nervous about Trump because he's a very unknown commodity. And his advice was, that's not a bad thing, because if you win, which he thought we had a good chance of winning, and he said if you win, what will happen is everyone will have to start doing a new calculation of what are they getting from America that's too good, and what are they willing to give in order to kind of keep what they have. And I think that it has set off a whole fresh view of America's foreign policy to say, how do we rebalance a lot of these relationships? And so we had people coming at us from everywhere. Again, I met with the Russian ambassador in the transition. I think that also was another area of proof that we didn't have a connection to the Russians during the campaign. Then he asked me to meet with Gorkov. I met with the guy for 30 minutes, and again, much has been done about it. But I do think what is important is the fact that we've been focused for the last 2 years while everyone's losing their mind about the Mueller investigation and Russia collusion. The president's been out there trying to rebalance our trade relationships, figure out how to get us out of some of these long-standing wars, figure out how to stimulate our economy, and I think we've done a very good job of that.
With that Gorkov meeting and other contacts with foreign governments, was one thing the FBI was concerned about when they were looking into your background for the permanent security clearance of the White House. Can you just make a general on-the-record assurance? Are there any entanglements that you have with foreign government or your businesses that could influence your decision that you're making in the White House?
So I've been in government now for 2 years, and when I was thinking of going into government, again, that's the last thing I ever thought I'd be doing in my life was being in government. I had 3 companies. I was doing very, very well. I had a great life, a lot less controversial than I guess things are now. But what I did was I hired some DC lawyers. I said, look at my financials. I have very extensive financial holdings. I was very successful in my businesses. And I said, can you tell me, can I do this? So we went to the Office of Government Ethics, which at the time was the Obama Office of Government Ethics. They made recommendations on what I needed to divest, what I can keep. I followed every one of their recommendations after a very exhaustive thing. And I think over the last 2 years, what you've seen from my performance is that on the files that I've been working on, I do think I've made progress. I think that I've adhered to every single one of the ethics waivers that they want me to barriers that they want me to keep. I've done nothing that's kind of influenced any of my decisions. And again, I work for the president. The president has certain foreign policy objectives that he'd like to see accomplished. If you look at what I did on the Mexico deal, I worked very closely with the Mexicans to try to come up with the USMCA, which is being heralded now, I think, as one of the greatest trade deals in the history of our country. I think that will add about 500,000 jobs. Should have a nice increase on GDP. And we did that in a way. It doesn't benefit me personally. The stuff I'm doing in the Middle East, again, I think it's taken us a while. We're going to unveil our plan the next couple of months. We've done a lot of things that are, I think, very important for Israel's security, but that's something that's one of the president's priorities. He campaigned on it. And then I think with China, the area where I've also worked with Ambassador Lighthizer and Secretary Mnuchin, I think we're making real progress towards trying to rebalance that relationship, which has been out of whack for a very long time. So I can just tell you very definitively, there's been no actions I've taken that have benefited me financially. To the contrary, actually, I've had to divest of a lot of things and avoid a lot of things. But I think that I've been fully vetted now after 2 years of 19 hours of testimony in different places. And again, there's been numerous front page stories talking about potential areas where there could be conflicts. But I think that we want people who have been successful in different areas going into government. And so that's why you have Office of Government Ethics, you have compliance, and you just have to adhere to that compliance. And I think I've done a perfect job in doing that.
One relationship that you developed is a relationship with the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The U.S. intelligence services have concluded that Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Do you dispute that?
Look, I'm not going to dispute American intelligence services recommendations. I'm also not going to talk about anything intelligence related. What I can say is that what we've done when we went to Saudi Arabia for the president's first trip was a very important trip, I thought. And what we were able to do there is to lay out what this president's top 4 priorities were in the Middle East. The number 1 priority was countering Iran. And I think what we've done is we've worked with our allies very closely to figure out how do you push back on Iran's aggression. I mean, everywhere in the Middle East where you look where there's terrorism, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's Hamas, they're all being funded by Iran, and they're trying to destabilize the region. They chant death to America, death to Israel. The number 2 priority was to defeat ISIS, and I think you've seen that the president's really turned up the pressure, and we've now destroyed the physical caliphate and taken that land back. And then the 3rd priority was defeating the ideology of extremism, and I think we've worked very closely with the Saudis to try to figure out how do you clean out a lot of the poison that was being taught in the mosques, and I think that we are making more progress than people thought we would be able to do on winning the ideology. The 4th priority was the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and we've worked very hard on that for the last couple of years. And I think that you'll see what we'll put out in a couple months, and I think that hopefully it provides a framework to maybe break through a very, very difficult problem that's been plaguing that region for a very, very long time.
Has the murder of Khashoggi impacted your relationship with Saudi Arabia, or did you give Saudi Prince Salman advice on how to handle the fallout after the murder?
Yeah, so again, the advice I gave was be as transparent as possible, and that obviously we have to make sure there's accountability for what happened, and the State Department's worked very closely.
Do you think he's followed that advice to be as transparent as possible?
We'll find out. But again, Secretary Pompeo and the State Department are leading the charge. They're working with the Turks, and they're also working with the Saudis to try to figure out how to get to the bottom of what happened. It's an absolutely terrible tragedy what happened. And again, it's absolutely a horrible thing. But again, my job for the president is I have certain objectives that are in America's interest that we need to accomplish, and I come into work every day saying, how do I move forward on these objectives that further America's interests?
And does the war in Yemen, the Saudi war in Yemen, has continued to escalate? There were more than 6,500 civilian deaths, according to Human Rights Watch. Does that human rights record have an impact on the U.S.-Saudi relationship right now?
Yeah, it does. I mean, look, you see what they're doing in Congress, and again, we've urged the Saudis to try to loosen up a lot and allow the aid in to get to the people.
Was Trump wrong to veto the congressional bill that would have cut aid to Saudi for the Yemen war?
Well, it's not cutting aid. It's not doing military sales. I think it's very pragmatic. I mean, they're talking about us wanting to help Russia. If you don't sell these materials to the weapons to Saudi Arabia, they're going to buy them from China and Russia. So at the end of the day, they need to be able to defend themselves, as all nations are. We want to be a dependable partner, which means that if you're locking up militarily with us, we want to be a dependable supplier so that you can do self-defense. But if you go to Yemen, it's not a dissimilar situation to what Israel has with Gaza, where you have the Houthis there who are basically chanting again, death to America, death to Israel. They're shooting rockets into UAE, into Saudi, and Saudi's trying to defend themselves. Maybe they haven't done the best job of trying to figure out how to do that, but I think the objective is a good objective. How they've gone about it is not the best. So our hope is, how do we work with them to make sure you can get as much humanitarian aid so the people are impacted as little as possible for it. But the goal is to try to figure out how to end that situation as quickly as possible.
Can you give us some more definitive time frame on when the Middle East peace plan will be released?
Yeah, so we're going to wait till after Ramadan now. We were getting ready at the end of last year, and then obviously they called for Israeli elections. Prime Minister Netanyahu had a great victory, and he's in the middle of forming his coalition. Once that's done, we'll probably be in the middle of Ramadan, so we'll wait till after Ramadan, and then we'll put our plan out. And what I'll say about that is, when my father-in-law asked me to work on this project, the Middle East peace process, I mean, it's about as tough of a problem set as you can get. And so we've taken, I think, an unconventional approach. We've studied, all the different past efforts and how they failed and why they failed. And there's been some tremendous work done by the people who have worked on this before us. So we've tried to do it a little bit differently. Normally they start with a process and then hope that the process leads to a resolution for something they have been able to resolve for a long time. What we've done is the opposite. We've done very extensive research and a lot of talking to a lot of the people. We're not trying to impose our will. I think the document you'll see, which is a very detailed proposal, is something we created by engaging with a lot of people from the region and people who have worked on this in the past. And I hope that it's a very comprehensive vision for what can be if people are willing to make some hard decisions. And so we started with a proposed solution, and then we'll work on a process to try to get there.
Does it include a two-state solution?
Yeah, so we have not said today. We're going to lay that out very clearly. I think that...
Can you get Arab country support for your plan?
I think that if people focus on the old traditional talking points, we will never make progress, right? I mean, you have the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, which was, I think, a very good attempt. But if that would have worked, we would have made peace a long time ago on that basis. So what we're going to put out is different. Our focus is really on the bottom up, which is how do you make the lives of the Palestinian people better? What can you resolve to allow these areas to become more investable? We deal with all the core status issues because you have to do it, but we've also built a robust business plan for the whole region. I think that the two together have the opportunity to push forward. And then from Israel's point of view, their biggest concern is just security. And I think that what we do is something that allows for Israel to maintain security, but there'll be tough compromises for both. I had a business mentor who would say to me that when he'd have to take tough decisions, he'd make a T-chart, reasons to do something, reasons not to do something. And I hope that when they look at our proposal, I'm not saying they're going to look at it and say this is perfect and let's go forward. I'm hopeful what they'll do is to say, look, there are some compromises here, but at the end of the day, this is really a framework that can allow us to make our lives materially better. And we'll see if the leadership on both sides has the courage to take the leap to try to go forward.
Well, let's move to another issue that is very easy to solve, immigration. You've been working since January on putting together some immigration proposals. When was the last time you had a fight with Stephen Mueller over immigration?
So Stephen and I have not had any fights, and what I'd say is that again, my father-in-law asked me, the president asked me to work on this topic. This isn't one of the topics I came to Washington really to work on, but it's a very important issue for our country. It's an important issue for the president. And I think we are at a time where people are understanding this issue maybe more than they ever have before. I do believe that the president's position on immigration has been maybe defined by his opponents by what he's against as opposed to what he's for. And what I've done is I've tried to put together a very detailed proposal for him that really goes through the following criteria. The first one is border security. I've spent a lot of time with the Border Patrol professionals, not the politicians, saying, what do we fully need to secure our border? Whether it's physical barrier, whether it's technology at the ports of entry, with the goal being to keep, illegal goods and keep out people who aren't coming in illegally, while also facilitating trade and the flow of legal people as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Make sure you have 100% scanning capability at all of our ports of entry. The second one is a merit-based system. If you look at the proportion of people that come through our legal immigration system based on family connections versus based on economy, and then you compare that to Canada, New Zealand, Australia, we're basically the inverse of them. And I do think that we have a lot of objectives that the president has. One, he wants to protect American wages. Number two, he wants to make sure our border is fully secure. Number three, we want to make sure that our country is welcoming and a place where we're able to attract the best and brightest from all over the world. Number three, we want to maintain our country's humanitarian values. We want to make sure that we're reunifying families. And we want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that allows our country to be competitive long term. So we're putting together a very detailed proposal. We're also working on a guest worker piece, which is important for agriculture and a lot of seasonal work. And my hope is that we can really do something that unifies people around what we're for on immigration. And
when do you think you'll put that out?
I'm going to present it. The president's been involved very much so. The team's been working. Probably the end of this week, next week, we'll present it again, and then he'll make some changes likely, and then he'll decide what he wants to do with it when he wants to do with it. But what I will say is that on immigration, I've had both Stephen Miller and Kevin Hassett, who runs the CEA, involved, and I think they both agree with what this is. And I say that if I can get Stephen Miller and Kevin Hassett to agree on an immigration plan, then Middle East peace will be easy by comparison. So, but I think it's very, very good, and it makes sense, and we have a lot of data to back it up, and it's very, very complicated, but it's a very interesting issue. And if we can solve it, I do think it's a critical component for America's long-term competitive advantage. And one thing I'll say is, if you look at this president's competitiveness agenda, you think about what we've done to do. The rest of the world right now, their GDP is flat to going down. Some countries are in recession. America's still growing. If you look at it, we've done deregulation, right? We've really freed up companies to be able to invest capital, which has created jobs. We've lowered the corporate tax rate, and we've given a tax cut to individuals, which means there's more consumption. We're working on trade deals. We've done more, this president's more involved in trade than probably any president maybe in history, with China, working with Japan. We did the USMCA, which is the largest trade deal in history. We figured out how to make our country energy independent. We've increased the amount of energy we're creating, which geopolitically is very, very important. We're investing in industries of the future, artificial intelligence, 5G, quantum computing, a lot of things that will allow us to be long-term competitive. And then also appointing a lot of conservative judges has allowed us and a lot of businesses to have certainty on what the law is. And so I think that those things, if you couple them with maybe infrastructure and with immigration reform, I think that will really keep our country long-term competitive for the long run.
Getting immigration reform is an incredibly difficult thing to do in Congress. It's a hard needle to thread. You were able to get a bipartisan bill through, working closely with a lot of advocates and others, members of Congress, on prison reform. That bill was able to expand job training, do more early release programs, and reduce some of the sentencing laws so that people who were sentenced for drug crimes can get out sooner. Do you see a pathway for other legislation following that? And then also I wanted to just ask you about prison reform and your experiences visiting your father in a federal penitentiary in Alabama. How did that influence your desire to work hard on that issue?
Well, I would say that, again, the prison reform issue was not one that made its way to the White House, not to my level, I think, in the past. And when I got to Washington, it was something that hadn't really been in the campaign, but it was something very personal to me, that I saw the impact that it had on the families of people who were in prison. And I also had the opportunity to meet a lot of people who were in prison, and I saw that a lot of these people, there were some bad people there, but there were also some good people who made mistakes. And in our company, we started a second chance hiring program where we would take people coming out of Rikers, you put them with mentorship, you give them job training, you give them skills training. And what we found is these people were so grateful for a second chance, and they really were able to make a lot of progress and live productive lives. And they were very grateful for having people take a chance on them. And so I saw a lot of red states, in Texas and in Kansas and Georgia. They were very successful in kind of changing the purpose of our prison system to say, how do we make this about rehabilitation as opposed to just locking up people and warehousing them? And so I think we were able to push some great reforms. I think it does show you that Washington can work. This was not D's versus R's. This was really us versus them. And one thing I'll say about the democratic process is that our founders were absolutely brilliant in terms of how they set it up. It's not supposed to be easy to change laws. You have to reach across the table. I took a lot of criticism from both sides. People said the bill was too left. People said the bill was too right. It was too soft on crime. It was too tough on crime. But ultimately, we came up with a fabulous bill that's going to impact hundreds of thousands of people's lives and I think make our communities safer. And the reality is that we have such a high recidivism rate in this country where people leaving prison, if they don't have skills, if they don't have a driver's license, they don't have a place to live, they don't have training to get a job, what do you expect them to do? And so I think we know where a lot of our future criminals are going and as a country are coming from. And as a country, if we invest the resources, the time, and the effort in figuring out how to take these people when they're in our custody and giving them the skills and the opportunity and the hope, I think that we can actually make a big difference. I think it will lower crime. It will take people right now who are costing us money because we're warehousing them and turn them into productive citizens. And I just have to say that, with the president, this was not an issue that he was very aware of. It wasn't really relevant to being in the real estate business and show business. But as he got into it, he's gotten very, very passionate, and he's become the biggest champion of saying, what more can we be doing to make sure that people leaving prison have a second chance? And I'll just say that, for this crowd, that one thing I will say about this president is he's accomplished a lot in a couple of years, and I find that he's a very open-minded person. I find he's a pragmatist, and I think that, again, on the issue of prison reform, it's a great example of how when people came to him and made a good argument, he bought into it, and not only did he bought into it, we would have been able to get forward these historic reforms had it not been for the president's leadership.
Jared, thank you. We're out of time, and I want to thank you for being a good sport, answering these questions. Also, I want to know, are we going to be seeing you out on the stump for the 2020 reelection campaign?
I am much more comfortable usually being kind of in my office than out in places like this. But I do think that for the 2020 campaign, we're building a fabulous campaign. And I think that the president has a very strong record to run on for the economy, for national security. And I guess the difference this time is that we have a lot of professionals, a lot more resources to be able to do it. So we're going to build a great campaign. But most importantly, it's going to be on where the country's going. And I think as long as the president's able to keep delivering on his promises of keeping the economy strong and keeping us safe, I think there's a lot of people in this country who are very appreciative of the sacrifices he's making to do the job he does and are very pleased with the results that he's been delivering.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.